Hey guys, tonight we are stepping off the battlefield and into the soft, strange twilight where myths grow old and even the greatest names in Greek history become quiet. There are no more trumpets here, no more laurels, just sand and dust and a sense that glory never knew how to stay. This isn't a story about gods. It isn't even a story about war. It's about what happens after. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The gods may not answer, but I definitely will. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're sitting with Achilles now, not the screaming whirlwind who dragged Hector around Troy, but the quieter version. The version who has nothing left to conquer. His armor is polished, but untouched. His sword rests by his side, and the sand keeps finding its way into his sandals. The war is still happening technically, but Achilles isn't in it anymore. Not really. After the rage, after Patroclus, after the moment his grief made him immortal, in song, Achilles is hollowed out. He walks the shore alone. The sea no longer calls to him like a mother. It just whispers like wind through broken reeds. Historians still argue whether Achilles knew about his fate from the start, whether he chose to die young and glorious. But in this moment you get the feeling that maybe he hoped just a little that there'd be time after, something more than songs, something more than war. A few soldiers still pass him, nod respectfully, whispering about how he'll never be touched in battle. But he doesn't meet their eyes. They aren't afraid of him anymore. They pity him. You trail behind him as he walks through the half-finished halls of the Greek camp. Everything here is temporary tense. Alliances, memory. He sits on a log and watches the horizon as if it might apologize for what it's taken. Here's a fringe little fact in one lesser-known tradition. Achilles could have lived a long, peaceful life if he'd stayed home, married, had children, grown old, but instead he chose Kleos, eternal fame. He traded tomorrow for a louder today. But today is quiet now. No one is fighting him. No one is praising him. The bards haven't arrived yet, and the gods are unusually silent. He picks up a handful of sand, lets it run through his fingers. It sticks to his skin in strange wet clumps. The thing about heroes is no one tells them how to rest. You sit beside him not sure whether to say anything. He doesn't look at you. He's watching the sea again, but this time it looks like he's trying to remember something about it, something soft. His feet leave no prints when he stands. He's already halfway to legend, but not yet, not quite. And that's the loneliest part of all. You stay behind Achilles now, not because he notices you, but because there's nowhere else to go. His presence fills the shore like smoke after a fire, warm in patches, but mostly just the memory of heat. He doesn't talk. but the silence around him hums like a closing door. You notice the others in the camp keep their distance, not out of fear, not out of reverence, but because they don't know what to say to someone who's already halfway gone. When your fate has a period stamped at the end of it, people stop using commas around you. Achilles stands barefoot in the surf armor, still gleaming on the sand behind him. He doesn't need it now. The prophecy says he'll die here. And there's a kind of peace in that, oddly enough. When the end is written, there's nothing left to decide, only to wait. And yet, you sense something in the way he watches the water, as if part of him wants to run. But where his mother Thetis once tried to hide him from this, disguised him as a girl, tucked him away on an island, surrounded him with dancers and silence. But Achilles even then burned to be remembered, burned to matter. And now you wonder, did he mistake noise for meaning? There's a small, strange story tucked in the folds of myth that says Achilles once wept, not for Patroclus or for Troy, but for the simple fact that no one would know how he laughed. They'd remember the rage, the victories, the armor, but not the way he tilted his head at a joke or the songs he hummed when he thought no one was listening. Historians still argue whether Achilles was proud of what he became, whether the glory was enough. The poems say yes. The quiet says otherwise. You see him now, alone by the fire. A plate of food untouched. A lyre resting nearby. Strings, dusty, one snapped. His hands are strong, but they shake slightly as he adjusts his cloak. No one sees this version, not in the statues, not in the epics. But he's real, he's here, and he's starting to feel the weight of being only remembered. He stares at his own heel sometimes, as if daring it to fail, as if hoping it will hurry up, because waiting to die as a legend is lonelier than dying as a man. You sit beside him unsure if he knows. The waves roll in. He doesn't move. And neither do you, because some farewells aren't loud. They're just the soft, slow realization that the story has already passed you by. You're not entirely sure how long you've been walking, but the shore has changed. The tents are sparser now. The air doesn't taste of salt and fire anymore. It's gentler, still, the kind of stillness that comes after years of chaos, after your name has been shouted so many times, it starts to echo back hollow. This is not the camp of Achilles, or the songs of Patroclus, or the rage of Ajax. No, this is a different quiet. This is home. You've followed Odysseus across the sea. He's finally here. After years, after gods and monsters, curses, and caves, lies, and longing, he's home in Ithaca. But there's no parade, no confetti made from laurel leaves. Just a man who looks a little thinner than the songs describe, standing at the edge of his land like a guest, like someone unsure if the key still fits in the door. Penelope waits inside, of course. She always did. And his bed, carved from the trunk of a living tree, is still there. His dog, faithful aging, dies upon seeing him again. which is both poetic and, well, tragic, in a quiet, unnecessary sort of way. But here's the thing no one tells you. Once Odysseus returns, the story doesn't get brighter. It gets dimmer, softer, like a lamp that flickers when the oil runs low. Historians still argue whether Homer meant to end the Odyssey with a reunion or a warning that sometimes coming home isn't the triumph, it's the test. Odysseus is no longer the man who left, and Ithaca is no longer the place that waited. You watch him move through his halls like a ghost. People bow. Servants murmur. Penelope clings to him as if he might vanish again. And maybe in some ways he already has. The war never truly ends for men like Odysseus. It gets quieter, more polite, but it never goes away. You follow him into the courtyard. He's trimming vines with a small bronze knife, not because they're overgrown, because it gives his hands something to do. His fingers twitch when he hears sudden sounds. His gaze is always slightly distant, like he's still expecting a cyclops to crash through the orchard or a siren to start singing from the cliffs. Peace feels fake when you've been trained to distrust silence. And so, even in victory, he paces. There's an old tale rarely told that after returning home, Odysseus found it impossible to sleep on the bed he fought so hard to return to. Too soft, too quiet. He started sleeping on the floor again, wrapped in old cloaks, pretending he was still beneath foreign stars. Penelope said nothing. She just laid a blanket beside him and joined him there. Here's a fringe tidbit from a late play fragment. An oracle once told Odysseus that his death would come from the sea, gentle as a breath. Some interpret this as old age. Others say it means he was never meant to be still, that the ocean itself would reclaim him when he stopped moving. You follow him down to the shoreline, not to sail, just to look. The waves roll in like memories he can't stop rereading. He bends to pick up a stone, then sets it down. He doesn't throw it. He doesn't need to. He's already cast everything away years ago. Crew years. Parts of himself he'll never find again. He sits, arms on his knees, staring across the water that once tried to kill him and then brought him back. There's something unspeakably lonely about surviving your own legend, about hearing your name in stories while trying to figure out how to be a husband again, a father, a neighbor. No monsters to outwit, no gods to flatter, just dinner and rain and aging knees. You follow him through the village. He nods to people. They nod back. But there's hesitation in their eyes. This isn't the man who left, and they aren't the people who waited. Everything returned, but nothing is the same. And Odysseus knows this. He walks a little slower, not from pain, but from calculation. He's trying to learn the rhythm of a life he doesn't recognize. He spends time with Telemachus, of course. Teaches him to fight, to rule, to think 3 moves ahead. But even that bond feels like building a bridge between 2 cliffs that never asked for connection. And Penelope, oh Penelope, they sit together often, in silence. not because they lack words, but because they know too many. She is the queen who held everything together with thread. He is the king who unraveled himself to return. There's an odd little myth fringe and whispered that Odysseus eventually leaves again. Not because he wants to, because he has to. Because stillness starts to itch under his skin. Because you can't stare at monsters for 10 years and then go back to dinner parties. You walk beside him in the orchard now. He plucks a fig from a tree and bites it absent-mindedly. Juice runs down his chin, and he wipes it away with the back of his hand. His eyes close, not from delight, from memory. Even sweetness feels like salt when your life has been measured in shipwrecks. He's not sad. Not exactly. Just suspended. Like a man trapped between pages, unsure what story he belongs in now. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy of Odysseus. He got everything he wanted, and still didn't know what to do with it. You sit with him until the stars come out. He doesn't move. Neither do you. The wind picks up. Somewhere in the distance, a sail flaps. He doesn't turn toward it, but you can tell he hears it. He always hears it. You find yourself standing by a broken altar, now tucked in the edge of an overgrown courtyard. It might have once been grand columns, carved with laurels and shields, marble benches, warmed by sunlight, but now it's cracked and forgotten. The kind of place where old heroes go to remember themselves and where no one else bothers to look. Jason sits here. Yes, that Jason. Leader of the Argonauts. Caesar of the Golden Fleece. Beloved of gods and men and far too many poets. But now, not so much. His hair is thinning. His eyes are cloudy. His hands are stained with wine he no longer enjoys and regrets he no longer hides. You sit across from him watching as he gently sets down the cup he never finishes. His mouth opens like he might say something, but he doesn't. Not yet. See, Jason's story didn't end with the fleece. Most don't. He came home, married Medea, fathered children, promised her the world, then left her for a princess. Because ambition in myth is always louder than memory. Historians still argue whether Jason ever truly loved Medea or just saw her as another prize. But what's certain is that when she took her revenge, when she killed the bride, the king, and even their own children, Jason lost everything he didn't think he'd have to miss. And now he sits in the ruins of his own ship. Yes, that ship, the Argo. It's propped up in the courtyard behind him, rotting and splintering like a jawbone left in the sun. He doesn't repair it. He just sits near it, as if being close to it keeps the glory from fading entirely. He runs his fingers along the edge of a plank, the wood soft as cloth now. Once it sang. Once it sailed with the finest crew in myth, Heracles, Orpheus, Atalanta. Now it creaks when the wind shifts. Now it waits to collapse. And Jason, he waits too. He's not old, not in the God-touched way of things. but he's worn out in ways age can't explain, the kind of tired that creeps in when the story doesn't love you anymore. You walk with him once around the courtyard. His footsteps are uneven. His sandals flop slightly. A boy walks past and doesn't recognize him. It stings more than it should. There's a fringe version of the story rarely quoted, where Jason tries to build a second Argo, a smaller one, just for him. But nothing fits together. The pieces don't speak to each other the way they used to. The wood cracks. The oars splinter. He gives up halfway through construction, leaves it half assembled like a forgotten game. He doesn't cry. He just stops. You find him one afternoon, napping beneath the hull of the old ship. It shades him better than a temple. It's the only place that still smells like purpose. His breathing is shallow soft. His fingers twitch in sleep. You wonder if he dreams of sailing still, of cutting through waves of stars, rising over the bow of Medea before she turned to fire, but probably not. He probably dreams of silence. Here's something strange some ancient texts say. Jason died not in battle, not in punishment, not even in despair, but quietly. A beam from the Argo broke loose and fell on him while he sat beneath it. The ship took him with it, as if myth decided to swallow its own legend. Poetic in a bleak sort of way, others say he was simply forgotten, that he wandered until people stopped asking who he was, that his name faded from lips and then from echoes and then from everything. And you can feel it now, sitting with him. The loneliness isn't just his, it's the world's, because no one prepares a hero for the silence after applause. You walk with him once more through the edges of the town. A woman selling figs looks up, sees him, then looks away. Children chase each other without songs about the Argo. A statue in the square is covered in ivy. No one bothers to clean it. Jason pauses by the water fountain. He dips a hand into the basin, pulls up a handful of water, and lets it slip through his fingers like it owes him nothing. And he nods once, not to you, to himself, to what he once was. He turns back to the courtyard. The Argo groans softly in the breeze, and you realize Jason didn't die when the ship fell on him. He died the moment he realized it was never going to sail again. You leave the broken beams of the Argo behind, walking slowly, as if each step has to recover from everything it just witnessed. Jason doesn't follow. He doesn't even turn. The courtyard fades behind you, like a page you've already read too many times. Now you find yourself on the side of a mountain, not a thunderous peak like Olympus. No snow, no gods, just a jagged slope, sun-bleached and silent, where rocks shift under your feet. And there's no clear path, only scorched grass and the smell of old fire. This is where Heracles ends. You remember Heracles, right? The strong one, the lion-skinned demigod with a club and a reputation as wide as the sky. Slayer of monsters, completer of 12 impossible labors. The man who held up the sky, wrestled death, and once cleaned out an entire stable with a river. And now he's climbing. alone. There's no entourage, no bard trailing behind him, just Heracles, dragging his body up the slope like he's carrying the whole myth with him. You can see it in his face. He's tired. Not muscle tired, soul tired. The kind of fatigue that doesn't sit in your legs but behind your eyes. He doesn't speak, but his breath rasps as he climbs. And every so often he pauses, not because he can't keep going, but because he's not sure if he should. You're witnessing the moment when the strongest man in the world no longer wants to hold anything up. So, how did we get here? After the labors, after the feasts and the hero cults and the statues, Heracles tried to settle down. He married again. Deianira, they say. She loved him, feared losing him. So when a centaur gave her a vial of love potion, she believed it. It wasn't love, it was poison. She smeared it on a robe and sent it to Heracles, hoping it would bind his heart to hers forever. It did bind something, his skin, his nerves, his screams. The robe burned him alive, not with fire, but with something worse. It melted into him, fused with him, turned his body into a battlefield he couldn't win. Here's a strange historical footnote. Some scholars believe the poison was real, derived from the blood of a centaur, tainted with hydra venom. Others think it's a metaphor for how love clings and kills at the same time. Either way, Heracles chose the mountain, Mount Oeta. He asked to be carried here or dragged himself up, depending on the version, and asked for a pyre, a funeral of his own making. But no one wanted to light it. Even his closest friends stood back. No one wanted to be the one who set a hero on fire. Until one man, Philoctetes, stepped forward, lit the torch, and in return received Heracles' bow. That's the part they like to tell, but not what happened in those last moments before the flames. You're here now. You watch Heracles lie down on the stack of wood. It creaks under his weight, an offering too small for someone so mythic. He's not crying. He's not shouting. He's waiting. Because there's nothing left to lift and nothing left to fight. Just heat and release. The flames rise slowly. They lick at the edges of his form, then bloom into full fire. But it doesn't feel tragic. It feels quiet, like the last breath of a god who wasn't quite allowed to be mortal. You sit at the edge of the slope, the fire reflecting in your eyes. There's no music, no morning chorus, just the crackle of myth becoming memory. And here's the part the epics don't emphasize enough. Heracles didn't die. Not fully. He ascended. The gods took him in at last, let him rest among the stars, gave him a seat in Olympus, even let him marry again, this time Hebe, goddess of youth. A reward, a redemption, a retirement plan. But you can't help wondering, what if he would have preferred a quiet death? What if he didn't want to shine forever in someone else's sky? What if he just wanted to be forgotten? You walk back down the mountain as the ashes settle. The wind carries no ashes, just warmth. Heracles is gone. Or maybe he's everywhere now, which in some ways is lonelier. Because when you become a constellation, no one ever asks how you're feeling. They just point at you from a distance and make wishes. You step away from Mount Oeta with warm ash on your sleeves. You don't brush it off. It's the kind of dust you carry, not because it belongs to you, but because it reminds you that someone once chose silence over endless glory. The road ahead is flatter now, less myth, more memory. The air is quiet, but not in a mourning sort of way. It's a waiting sort of quiet. And waiting, as it turns out, is where you find Bellerophon. He isn't riding Pegasus anymore. That part is important. Because if Heracles was the hero who bore weight no one else could carry, Bellerophon was the hero who wanted to fly above it all and then learned that the sky has teeth. You find him sitting in the dry grass outside a crumbling village, staring up at the clouds like he still expects one of them to offer forgiveness. His armor is gone. His tunic is dusty. There's a crack in one sandal, and his fingernails are rimmed with earth. He's not broken, but he is emptied. This is a man who once rode a winged horse into battle, who once killed the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster with a lion's head, a goat's body, and a serpent for a tail, who once stood before kings and gods and won. And now, he feeds goats. You sit beside him. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't speak. He just nods once, as if to say, yes, I remember too. So, what happened? Like many heroes, Bellerophon's rise was steep and fast and loud. He had favor, fame, a divine steed gifted by Poseidon himself. And after slaying monsters and winning battles, after proving himself again and again, he decided there was only one place left to go, Mount Olympus. Not for a visit, not for an invitation, for a claim. He believed he had earned a seat among the gods, that his victories, his virtue, his divine parentage entitled him to more than just praise from mortals. So he mounted Pegasus, spurred the beast skyward, and aimed for the summit. And then Zeus sent a gadfly, just a tiny sting. But it was enough. Pegasus reared. Bellerophon lost his grip and fell. Historians still argue whether he survived the fall or died mid-air. But the version you're watching, the version most rarely told, is the one where he lived. That's what makes it tragic. He lived, injured, exiled, humiliated. He wandered from town to town, never welcomed, never celebrated. No one likes a hero who flew too high and landed badly. They whispered, they pointed, they moved on. You follow him through a village market. The stalls are plain. The people don't recognize him, or if they do, they pretend not to. Bellerophon doesn't correct them. He doesn't boast. He just buys figs and heads back to the hills. Here's an odd little footnote from a forgotten scholar in some tellings. Bellerophon talks to Pegasus in his dreams, as if the horse never left, as if the fall never happened. Some nights the dreams are so vivid, he wakes up reaching for reins that aren't there. He doesn't keep mirrors in his home anymore. He says they reflect things that never existed. You sit with him at dusk. The hills are gold and dry and smell of time. He tells you a story not of the chimera, not of Olympus, but of a time a small boy offered him water from a cracked bowl. No recognition, just kindness. That's the only thing I remember. Clearly now, he says, voice low. Not the monster, not the mountain, just that little boy. He's quiet after that, for a long time. Then almost to himself, I should have stayed low. There's a strange, almost cruel irony to his fate. He wasn't punished with fire or banishment or madness. He was given the one thing most heroes are denied: time. And with it, the slow, constant unraveling of the myth he once wore like armor. You watch him feed the goats. He whistles, and they come. His hands are gentle. His back is sore. His legend is thin as paper. But he's still here, alive. And that in some ways is the loneliest ending of all. Because stories are remembered. People are not. You don't follow Bellerophon when he disappears over the next ridge. You let him go, because some endings don't want witnesses. The grass grows taller where he walks, and you wonder if it's always been that way, or if maybe, just maybe, the earth still remembers who he used to be. Now you walk into shadow, not darkness exactly, but a place where light moves more slowly, as if hesitant, as if respecting the silence of a man who once played music for the gods and now plays for no one. You're entering the cave of Orpheus. No torches, no altars, just stone and moss and the distant trickle of underground water. You hear the faintest vibration. Before you see him, a string being plucked, then another and another, like raindrops hitting a thread. Orpheus doesn't look up when you arrive. He's seated on a rock, his lyre in his lap, his fingers hovering over the strings like ghosts who haven't quite learned to pass through things. This is the man who sang trees into stillness, who made rivers stop running, who brought Hades himself to tears. And now he's forgotten the words. You sit in the cave with him. He doesn't speak. His eyes are on the ceiling, low, uneven, scarred with old root systems that never found light. The cave is not cold. It's paused, like the moment before a note begins. You remember his story. Everyone does. Orpheus, whose bride Eurydice died too soon. Orpheus, who descended into the underworld, not with sword or shield, but with song. And the song worked. It worked. Hades, Persephone, all of them, moved by the music. They let her go. On one condition. He must walk in front of her and never look back. So he did. He walked. Step after careful step, breath after trembling breath, believing she was behind him. until the very last stretch. The sunlight was ahead. He was almost free. He could feel her, and he looked back. Just once. She vanished. Gone. A sigh before it became a name again. Historians still argue whether Orpheus was cursed to fail or simply couldn't help himself, whether it was doubt, love, hubris, or fear that turned his head. But no matter the cause, the result was the same. You see it now in the way he touches his lyre gently, like it's cracked. Here's a lesser-known version of the tale. Some say Eurydice called out to him just before he crossed the final threshold, that he turned not out of doubt, but in joy, that he wanted to see her smile when she stepped into the light. And that was enough to break the deal. A tragic miscalculation, a beautiful mistake. You sit quietly as he plays now, not for the gods or the trees or even for Eurydice. He plays for the silence, for the memory of how it used to feel to matter. There are songs in the notes, yes, but no lyrics anymore. He doesn't trust words now. Words have edges. Notes just disappear. You notice the cave walls are lined with carvings, not of gods, not of monsters, just faces, dozens of them, all variations of one woman. He never stopped trying to remember her. You want to ask him something, anything. But Orpheus has become like one of his songs best experienced without interruption. There is a strange myth, rare, nearly erased, that says, after Eurydice vanished, Orpheus swore off all company, that he refused women, ignored praise, and wandered, singing only to trees, until one day even the trees stopped listening. And so he sat in a cave like this one, and slowly stopped singing. You feel it now, that soft ache that comes not from loss, but from knowing the loss will never stop echoing. He strums again. This time the note lingers longer, vibrates through the cave and into your chest. It sounds like what grief feels like 5 years later, quiet, constant, without fire. You watch him as he finally sets the lyre down beside him. His hands rest in his lap. He closes his eyes, and the silence that follows is not empty. It is everything he has left. You step away from Orpheus's cave with that final chord still humming against your ribcage. It's strange how silence can be louder than song, how loss can echo even when no one speaks its name. The path ahead is narrow, overgrown, but not unfamiliar. This is a place between endings, not death, not glory, but that soft, aching space where time doesn't quite know what to do with you. You don't have to walk far before you feel it. A weight in the air, a tension like a bowstring pulled too tight, never released. It pulls at your steps, slows your breathing, and then you see her. Atalanta. She's not running, not now. She sits in a clearing, her back against a tree, one leg extended, the other pulled in her forehead, resting on her knee, like she's trying to listen to something deep inside herself. Her quiver leans against the bark. Her bow lies across her lap, untouched. You expected movement. You expected wind. and dust and speed. But Atalanta is still, and that stillness feels sacred. She's not like the other heroes. She wasn't born into armor or crowned in war. She came from the woods, raised by a bear, they say, fast enough to outrun anyone, woman or man, smart enough to know that being fast wasn't enough when the world keeps trying to catch you. You remember her story. She raced her suitors, all of them, said she'd only marry the one who could beat her. Most never had a chance. She flew like a shadow across rivers, through forests, under sun-split sky. And always they fell behind. Until one day, one man didn't. Hippomenes. But not because he was faster. Because he was clever. Because he used golden apples, gifts from Aphrodite, to distract her, to slow her, to turn her head. 3 times she glanced back. 3 times she reached for gold. And on the 3rd, he passed her. She married him, because the rules were the rules. But no one ever asked if she wanted to. Historians still argue whether Atalanta was tricked or simply tired, whether she let him win or truly lost, whether the golden apples were a curse or a kindness. But here's what's harder to debate. After the race, she stopped running, and no one ever wrote about her speed again. You sit beside her now, though she doesn't open her eyes. Her breath is slow even. She looks more like a statue than a hero, but not the kind you place in a temple, the kind carved by time itself out of silence and memory. There's a lesser-known ending to her story, one that doesn't make it into the myths sung by crowds. It says that Atalanta and Hippomenes angered the gods, that they forgot to thank Aphrodite for the apples, that their passion, once wild, became a mistake, that they were turned into lions, cursed to pull the goddess's chariot side by side forever, but never again, touching as lovers. Eternal companionship without closeness. A race they can never finish. Others say that's just a metaphor, that Atalanta never truly became a lion, just a woman who learned to keep her head down, her stride short, her voice low. That marriage took more than her name. It took her motion. But here in this clearing, you see something else. Her feet twitch in her sleep, like she's dreaming of running, not for love, not for freedom, just for herself. You watch as a breeze moves across her skin. Her fingers twitch. One eye opens slightly, then closes again. She doesn't move, but something shifts. She remembers who she was, and maybe that's all she needs. You stay there until the wind settles, until the leaves stop stirring, until the bough beside her gathers dust, and you realize it doesn't matter how fast she used to run. What matters is that she's still here, and no one has caught her. Not really. You walk away from the clearing slowly, careful not to disturb the air Atalanta left behind. The silence feels earned, like a medal no one ever placed around her neck. The forest thins, then opens, and you step onto a worn path, not made of marble or myth, but of compacted earth, shaped by years of quiet feet, going nowhere fast. You're walking a road now that once held parades, a road once lined with laurel, with garlands, with voices shouting names that shook the sky. But not anymore. The dust here doesn't rise, it settles. This is where the heroes used to walk, not in triumph, not in armor, just at the end. And now you walk it too. There are no signs, no mile markers, just the occasional rusted sword, buried half in dirt, or a stone bench worn smooth by 100 weary backs. You begin to notice the statues. They're not polished, not posed. These aren't the dramatic busts you see in temples or museums. They're smaller, rough, set at odd angles. Some don't have names. You recognize some faces. You don't recognize most. That's the thing no one tells you. Not all heroes become legends. Not all names survive. Some are whispered once and then swallowed by the very songs that tried to preserve them. You sit on one of the benches. It doesn't groan. It's long since given up complaining. The trees above are tall and old. You imagine they've seen 1,000 promises shouted and forgotten, 1,000 warriors marching off, and maybe a dozen returning. And those dozen, they came back quiet. Here's a little-known line from a fragment of Hesiod. The path from war is longer than the path to it. No one ever remembers that line. It's not very catchy, but it lingers, especially here. You watch as a man walks past you. He's limping, not dramatically, just enough to shift his weight. He doesn't meet your eyes. He carries a small bag over one shoulder. No sword, no shield, just enough food to get to wherever next is. Was he a hero, a soldier, a name once shouted across a battlefield? Does it matter? He passes. The dust settles again. Further ahead, you come to a fountain, or what's left of one. Cracked stone dry basin moss, growing where water used to fall. Someone carved a phrase into the rim, so faded you can barely make it out. Let them rest. That's all. Not a command, not a prayer. Just a sentence, a soft request. You sit there for a while, and in that sitting, something happens. You feel the fatigue settle in not just yours, but theirs, all of theirs. The weight of running, of fighting, of never knowing when the story stops. You begin to notice things you missed. The sandals hanging from a nail, the shield used as a rain dish, a cloak folded into a pillow under a tree. This place isn't an ending, it's an in-between, a waiting room for the ones who didn't die but didn't quite return either. A quiet corridor between applause and erasure. There's a story not popular, never heroic, that says some of the greatest warriors spent their final years planting trees, that when the crowd stopped chanting, they learned how to dig and to water and to wait. You like that version. You like to think maybe Achilles could have planted something. Maybe Odysseus eventually stayed. Maybe Theseus built something small and didn't tell anyone his name. Maybe being forgotten was the only way to breathe. You stand now. The path is still ahead, but you've begun to understand what it is. It's not for walking anymore. It's for sitting, for remembering, for letting go. The leaves rustle overhead. You don't speak, you don't have to, because the dust here remembers every name, even the ones no one says out loud anymore, especially those. You linger on the road, half expecting the wind to change direction or a voice to call your name, but nothing happens. And maybe that's the point. You're not here for spectacle anymore. The stories have slowed. The drums have stopped. Now there is only this, the long aching stretch of what remains when the final chapter turns to dust. You keep walking. The earth is soft beneath your feet, pressed down by centuries of comings and goings. You pass more statues, some broken, some barely formed, their faces smoothed by rain and time. No one has come to fix them. No one needs to. And then you see it. A figure in the field, kneeling. You know who it is before he turns. Philoctetes. He isn't glorious, he isn't golden. He's hunched slightly, bandaged foot, resting on a flat rock. His bow, that bow rests across his lap. It's wrapped in leather edges worn. You've seen paintings of it, gleaming with divine precision. But this is not that. This is what a sacred weapon looks like after years of weather and silence. You approach quietly, not wanting to startle him. He looks up anyway. There's no surprise in his face, just recognition, not of you, of the moment, like he's been expecting it. You sit. He doesn't speak at first, and neither do you. You just watch the tall grass shift around you, the way wind carries the weight of what no one says. Eventually he sighs, not from pain, from memory. You remember his story, of course. The great archer gifted the bow of Heracles, the man who burned alone on Lemnos, abandoned by his comrades because of a wound that wouldn't heal and a smell they couldn't bear. Historians still argue whether his exile was strategic or cruel, whether Odysseus lied to him when he left, whether the gods agreed. But Philoctetes doesn't argue anymore. He knows what happened. He remembers the silence after the ships disappeared, the way the horizon never blinked, the way the birds grew quiet when he wept. 9 years. 9 years alone on an island with a festering wound and a bow that could still kill a god. Here's a fringe myth buried in a fragment of Aeschylus' Philoctetes, used to sing to himself at night, not to pass the time, but to convince his voice that it still existed. Some nights, even the echoes wouldn't come back. You ask if he forgave them. He shrugs. Eventually he says, "They needed me more than I needed them." And he's not wrong, because when the Greeks needed Troy to fall, they remembered him. They remembered the bow. They remembered the pain they left behind, and they came crawling. Odysseus, Neoptolemus, all of them, begging him to return. And he did. He killed Paris, helped end the war, saved the very people who once left him to rot. And then He vanished, not from punishment, from choice. You see it now. This clearing these stones, the soft sigh of the field. It's not exile, it's peace. There's something quietly devastating in that he had to be broken and burned and forgotten before he could finally choose stillness. You ask him what happened to the bow. He lifts it briefly. It groans in his hands. I kept it, he says, not for the gods, for the balance. You don't understand. He smiles. I use it to prop the door open when it's hot. And somehow that feels more sacred than any temple. You sit until the sun begins to lower. He doesn't ask you to stay. He doesn't ask you to leave. He just says, tell them I stayed. Not because he has to, because he can. And that in the end is the truest power left. You leave Philoctetes behind as the shadows lengthen, stretching like fingers across the field. The light is golden now, warm and soft, the kind of glow that makes even ruins look holy. The wind smells like old things, olive bark, worn leather dust from shields no longer raised. You don't rush. The path you're on now doesn't lead up or down. It curves gently, like memory spiraling inwards instead of out. The air hums with the weight of stories, unfinished, not because they were forgotten, but because no one knew how to end them. You round a bend and find her. A woman sitting by a pool, not a grand one, not marble-lined or fed by mountain springs, just a shallow basin, still and dark, tucked beneath a canopy of reeds. She's barefoot, legs folded to one side, gown trailing in the water. Ariadne. You almost don't recognize her. Not because she's changed, but because this is the first time you've seen her not mid-motion, not running from Crete, not reaching out to Theseus, not handing over the thread that would make him famous. Just here, still. She turns slightly when she hears your footsteps, but says nothing. She gestures to the water. You sit, and the quiet settles. You've heard her name spoken 1,000 ways, as heroine, as victim, as queen, but always in someone else's story, always as an accessory to someone else's climb. It's strange you think how a woman who saved a life was remembered only as the one who was left behind. Because that's what happened, wasn't it? She loved Theseus, helped him escape the labyrinth, gave him everything she had, and he abandoned her on an island, alone, asleep. No letter, no explanation, just sails, retreating into a horizon that didn't care how many knots she'd tied in her own heart. Historians still argue why he did it, whether he meant to, whether the gods forced his hand, whether he was afraid to love something stronger than his own ambition. But Ariadne doesn't argue anymore. She's here, and she's listening. There's an odd version of her myth, hardly told, that says she never wept, that she stood and watched the ship go, then turned inland and built a home out of coral and driftwood, that she lit a torch every night, not to signal distress, but to remind the stars that she was still there. Later, Dionysus found her, took her as his wife, gave her a crown of stars. That's the version most people prefer. It's easier to believe in divine compensation than to sit with the ache of abandonment. But what if she never left the island? What if she chose solitude over apology? What if this pool is the only crown she ever needed? She dips her hand into the water and pulls it out slowly, watching the droplets slide down her wrist. She doesn't speak, but the gesture is clear. Some wounds don't scar. They stay open, not bleeding, just there. You ask her if she misses him. She tilts her head. Her mouth moves like it's shaping a no, but then stops. After a long pause, she says, "I miss the part of me that trusted," and that lands heavier than any betrayal ever could. She picks up a piece of thread from the ground beside her, golden frayed. You wonder if it's that thread, the one she gave him, the one that led him out of the dark. She ties it around a reed slowly, precisely, letting it wave in the breeze like a flag that no longer needs rescuing. She turns back to you, eyes soft but steady. "Tell the stories," she says, "but don't skip the silence." You nod, because she's right. The silence matters. It's where the truth hides, where the weight is, where the story becomes real. You stay until the moonlight begins to ripple on the pool's surface. Then you stand. She doesn't watch you go. She's busy, listening to the water. And this time no one sails away. The night has settled like a shawl across your shoulders, not heavy, but present. You walk now by starlight tracing the edge of a coastline where no waves break. It's the kind of place where stories come to end themselves, not with bangs, but with gentle sighs. You don't expect to find her not here, but she's waiting. Phaedra, sitting atop a low stone wall, feet bare, toes curled over the edge as if she's thinking about jumping, not to fall, just to feel the air push back. Her robe is too fine for this landscape, draped in expensive dye, a shade only royalty could afford. But it's fraying at the hem, touched too many times by grief. She sees you, but says nothing. So you sit. You know her name from whispers, from plays, from warnings whispered in the halls of old houses. Wife of Theseus, stepmother to Hippolytus, woman of ruin. But no one ever starts her story at the beginning. They skip the part where she was married for power, not passion, where she was offered as a treaty, not a bride, where her name became a signature before it was ever spoken aloud. You remember the myth, how she fell in love with her stepson, how she confessed, or perhaps was exposed, how Hippolytus rejected her, how she lied, how he died, how she died. Historians still argue what really happened, whether she was mad or manipulated, whether the gods cursed her or men just needed a scapegoat again. But Phaedra doesn't look like a villain. She looks tired. There's a version of her tale, less known, barely recorded, that says she didn't lie out of malice, that she was terrified, that she panicked, that the shame of loving someone she shouldn't have turned her blood to ice, and when the world around her offered no forgiveness, she made her exit. But here she is, not gone, not broken, just revising. She glances sideways at you. You know what no one tells you about guilt, she asks. You shake your head. It doesn't fade. It ferments. She pulls a dried fig from her pocket and takes a bite. Offers you one. It tastes of earth and salt. You can't outrun the stories, she says, but sometimes you can outsit them. You're not sure if that's hope or surrender. Maybe it's both. She reaches into the folds of her robe and pulls out a thin, cracked tablet. It's old, inscribed. She hands it to you without looking. On it, one word, then, not. Not what? She shrugs. Not what they said. Not what I meant. Not who I am. She smiles. Small. Crooked. Sometimes not is all that's left. You trace the letters with your thumb. You don't ask questions. Because this moment isn't for answers. It's for resting in the presence of someone who was never allowed to speak without consequence. The wind brushes against her cheek. She closes her eyes and leans into it like an old friend. There's something holy about that silence, something clean. You stay beside her until the stars shift. When you finally rise to go, she doesn't follow. She doesn't watch. But her voice reaches you one last time. They called me dangerous, she says, but really, I was just too loud in the wrong places. You nod, though she can't see it. And you walk on carrying her, not like a keepsake, a rejection of the lie, a place for something new to begin. The wind stiffens slightly as you leave Phaedra, brushing through the tall grass like fingers sifting through memories. Each step now feels more deliberate, as if you're no longer wandering, but being led by the echo of footsteps left behind by stories that still haven't finished echoing. You walk uphill for a while, though the incline is gentle, like a breath held and slowly released. There is a house at the top. Old, of course. Everything here is. But not ruined. It's still standing in that way. Some things refuse to fall. The door is cracked open. Not welcoming, not warning, just open. So you step inside, and you see her. Helen. Yes, that Helen. Not the face that launched 1,000 ships. Not the diamond in the middle of a war. Just a woman, seated on a bench by a window, hair streaked with gray robe, simple eyes turned outwards toward the sea. She doesn't notice you at first. Or maybe she does and just doesn't care. She's had enough of being looked at. The room smells like cedar and rose water. Not perfumed, just lived in. There's no crown, no mirror, no jewels. Just a spool of thread on the table. A comb. A single loaf of bread cooling on a windowsill. You sit across from her without asking. She doesn't blink. You expect her to be regal, maybe even resentful. But she's neither. She is quiet, like a storm that has finally decided it's not worth raining anymore. You've heard her myth, of course. Everyone has. How she was taken or ran from Sparta to Troy. How the war began with her. How men died for her. How gods fought over her. But nobody ever asked if she wanted any of it. Historians still argue about that, whether Helen was kidnapped or complicit, whether she was a pawn or a player, whether she loved Paris or hated him. But Helen doesn't argue anymore, because she was never just a lover. She was a symbol, and that was the problem. You watch her now as she picks up the thread from the table, ties it loosely around her finger. She pulls gently, lets it slip free. The knot comes undone. She does it again and again. You ask if she ever misses Sparta. She doesn't answer. You ask if she ever loved Paris. She smiles just a little, a tilt of the lips that doesn't touch her eyes. I loved being seen, she says, then softer, until I wasn't. There's a fringe version of her myth, rare and largely dismissed, that says after the war she disappeared into obscurity, not as a queen, not as a goddess, just as a woman who moved to a small island and never told anyone her name. They say she taught weaving, that she never spoke about the war, that when a visitor once asked if she was Helen of Troy, she laughed and said she was never real. Maybe this is that house. Maybe you are that visitor. You glance around. There's a sword mounted on the wall, not polished, not sharp, just hanging, like a memory pinned to plaster. Helen follows your gaze. They thought I was a prize, she murmurs, but I was always a mirror. She turns to you, then truly looks at you. They saw what they wanted. That's what started the war. She leans forward, elbows on knees. No one ever started a war over me. That lands with a weight you weren't ready for. Because you realize she's right. It was never about Helen. It was about what she represented. Honor, pride, ownership. She was the excuse, not the cause. You ask her what she wants now. She shrugs, less, and then after a long pause, to be remembered as quiet, she picks up the thread again, pulls, lets it fall. No fanfare, no speeches, just the soft sound of something being gently undone. You stay until the light fades through the window. When you leave, you don't look back. She doesn't need to be seen anymore. She just needs to be. You walk down from Helen's house with something heavy and quiet in your chest. It isn't sorrow, not exactly. It's more like recognition. That strange ache when a statue stops being a symbol and starts becoming a person. When the stories you were raised on crack a little and something real begins to seep through the marble. The path curls toward a grove now. Moonlight slices through the trees in silver threads, soft and flickering like a loom worked by an unseen goddess. You hear the trickle of water before you see it. A spring, and beside it a woman seated on a flat stone, her hands cupped beneath the stream, letting it pool before slipping through her fingers. Penelope, you know her story too. But this time, she sees you first. Lost, she asks, voice low and calm. You shake your head. She nods, approving. Good. Too many people come here still looking. She gestures to the spot beside her. You sit. It's hard to look at her and not think of Ithaca, of the loom, of 20 years of waiting. But Penelope doesn't carry herself like a woman defined by patience. She sits with the confidence of someone who knows she held an entire kingdom together with nothing but thread and wit. And yes, you remember the version where she undid her weaving each night, tricking her suitors for 3 long years. But there's another version, a quieter one that says she wasn't weaving a funeral shroud at all, that she was writing, stitching poetry into her fabric, not lies, just truth disguised as craft. Historians still argue if she ever really believed Odysseus would come back, whether her loyalty was strategy or love. But Penelope doesn't argue anymore. She lifts her hands, letting the last of the spring water drip from her fingers. You know what no one talks about, she says. How many things you can build with waiting. She smiles, faint but warm. Not just walls, ideas. You glance down. There's a scrap of cloth beside her. A tapestry, maybe? Or just a bit of something larger. Threads cross in careful patterns. No heroes, no battles, just waves, a shoreline, a little house on a hill. I used to dream of peace like other people dream of war, she says. You ask if she ever got bored. She raises an eyebrow. With suitors trampling my halls and servants whispering at doors, boredom was a luxury I couldn't afford. She pauses, fingers tracing the edge of the fabric. They thought I was passive, waiting, hopeless. Her voice sharpens, but only slightly. But hope is work. It takes shape. It takes teeth. There's a little-known thread in Homeric commentary that claims Penelope once orchestrated an entire rebellion within her own house using only coded weavings and subtle nods to her servants. It was never confirmed, of course, but the idea lingers. And sitting here with her, it feels real. You ask her if Odysseus changed. She gives you a look, half amusement, half exhaustion. He came home with stories, wounds, silence. Then she adds softer, so did I. She looks toward the water. People think reunion means picking up where you left off, she says. But time doesn't pause. It folds. And sometimes when you open it again, she doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't have to. You sit with her until the moon is nearly overhead. The air cools. The water keeps trickling. Finally, she stands, brushes her hands on her tunic, looks at you like you're another suitor to be dismissed, but kindly. Don't wait too long, she says. You ask? For what? She smiles. For anything, everything, nothing. Then she turns and walks into the grove steps, soundless, on the moss. And the loom in your mind begins to unravel and reweave itself thread by thread. The forest thins behind you, the hush of leaves giving way to a more open landscape. The moon hangs low now, almost shy, casting soft silver arcs across the hills. Each step forward feels gentler than the last, like the earth itself is encouraging quiet. You begin to notice something strange. Footprints. Just one set weaving gently along the path ahead of you. Not hurried, not heavy, just steady, like someone walking, because walking is the only thing left to do. You follow. Eventually, the trail leads to a wide, shallow lake. Mist hovers just above the surface, curling around the ankles of the woman standing at its edge. She doesn't turn around, doesn't flinch, just watches her own reflection ripple in the water. You know her name before she speaks it. Medea. Yes, that Medea. The name they whisper with discomfort. The woman they tuck behind warnings and footnotes. The story that even bards tell with hesitation in their voices. You expect fire in her eyes, maybe smoke, but she's quiet, hair down, shoulders bare. No crown, no chariot of dragons, no spilled potions or crying children. Just her, alone, breathing. She finally turns to look at you, and there's something startling in her expression. Not rage, not remorse. Just the stillness of someone who's held their breath too long. You came to see the monster, she says. You shake your head. She nods anyway. They all do. You sit near her, careful not to disturb the mist. She watches you for a long time, then looks back at the water. They never tell you how grief mutates, she murmurs, how it starts as a wound and grows teeth. You remember her myth, how she helped Jason steal the golden fleece, how she betrayed her family, how she fled with him, loved him, bore him children, and how he left her, how she retaliated. Historians still argue over the details, whether her actions were part of a ritual, whether she was protecting herself, whether the myth was exaggerated to vilify a foreign woman who dared to outsmart men. But Medea doesn't argue anymore. People say, I lost everything, she says, but really, I gave everything. She plucks a stone from the lakeshore and tosses it into the water. It lands with a soft plunk, barely disturbing the mist. There's a kind of madness that comes with being used, she says. Not the loud kind, the quiet, crumbling kind, like a wall giving way, grain by grain. You ask if she regrets it. She laughs, dry and short. Regret is for people who think they had a choice. There is a lesser-known version of her myth, preserved in a scrap of Hellenistic poetry, where she never harms her children. Instead, she fakes their deaths and sends them away hidden to live under new names. It's said she visits them in secret, disguised as a beggar woman, just to see them smile. You hope that version is true, but Medea doesn't confirm or deny it. She bends down, dips her hands into the lake. Water's the only thing that doesn't lie, she says. It reflects, it holds, it swallows. You ask what she sees in the reflection. She stares for a long time. Someone who stopped asking for permission. You sit in silence, the mist wrapping itself around you like gauze. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls. Once, then goes quiet. The lake doesn't move. Neither does she. Eventually, she turns back to you. Don't try to explain me, she says. Just let me be unfinished. You nod. Because not all stories need redemption. Some just need space to settle. You leave her there, still watching the water. And, for the first time in a long while, she doesn't seem lonely. Just free. You walk now without direction, but not without purpose. The air feels different here, lighter, tinged with something like old perfume. Not sweet, not floral, something ancient, like dried resin, or the last breath from a clay jar that's been sealed for centuries. You pass an orchard. The trees are heavy with fruit, but none of it is picked. No baskets, no ladders. Just ripeness hanging on the edge of rot. You follow the path until it curls into a courtyard, half swallowed by vines. At the center stands a statue. No, not a statue. A woman, perfectly still, arms raised as if conducting the wind. You recognize her, not because she's famous, but because she's always here somewhere, just outside the spotlight of myth. Hecuba, the queen whose name they barely say, the mother who lost everything. She turns slowly when she senses you, not startled, but deliberate, like a door being opened with care after years of rust. Another visitor, she says, looking for what's left. You don't reply. She smiles, just barely. Good. Silence is polite here. You sit across from her on a stone bench. The vines shift above leaves, whispering in a language neither of you try to translate. You've heard the end of Troy told many ways, how Priam was slaughtered, how the city fell, how the Greeks burned temples and dragged children from mothers' arms. But Hecuba's story is usually a footnote. After the fall, she was taken as a slave. No chariot, no battlefield glory. Just a queen turned captive. Historians still argue about what became of her, whether she died at sea, threw herself into the waves, or was transformed into a hound by the gods. But no version ends happily. And Hecuba, she doesn't offer a preferred ending. They always ask about the war, she says, but no one asks what it's like to survive it. You glance around. The courtyard is half lit by the moon, and you begin to see shapes, stones, bones, bits of cloth. Not arranged, just left behind. You know what's worse than grief, she asks. Grief that has to behave. You ask her what she means. They let me cry, she says, but not scream. They let me remember, but not hate. She picks a fruit from the tree behind her. It's soft, overripe. She bites into it anyway. I was expected to endure, she says between chews, as if endurance is a virtue and not just a slow form of death. There's a forgotten epic fragment, just a few lines where Hecuba stands on the deck of a Greek ship and spits into the ocean, cursing every god by name. It was deemed apocryphal, too bitter, too unqueenly. But here it feels truer than marble. You ask her if she still dreams. She looks up at the sky. Only when I let myself. Then she adds, and only of things before the horses came. You don't need to ask which horses. You both know. The ones inside the walls. The ones that didn't neigh. There's a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just full. Finally, she hands you the rest of her fruit. Take it, she says. You'll need something sweet for the road. You bite into it. It tastes like salt. You leave her seated there, surrounded by a silence she's earned. Not the silence of surrender. The silence of someone who outlived every version of her name. The orchard slips away behind you, swallowed by ivy and memory. The air shifts again, cooler, now tinged with something metallic. Not blood exactly, but close. Like the breath of iron after rain, or the cold scent of old bronze left too long in the dark. Your feet lead you through a broken colonnade. Marble columns lean like tired sentinels, vines coiling around their middles like forgotten sashes. You pass what might have been a temple, though there are no offerings left, only dust and soft echoes of footsteps that once meant more. And then, seated on a block of collapsed stone, you find her. Cassandra. Her hair is a tumble of black curls, wind mussed and unbothered. She's barefoot, one leg tucked under her, the other outstretched toes, absent-mindedly sketching circles in the sand. She's scribbling something on a broken shard of pottery figures, or words, or maybe just nonsense. She looks up before you speak. Oh, she says, another listener who won't believe me. You raise your hands slightly, peaceably. I won't ask you to, she adds and smiles. It's more relaxing that way. You sit beside her, not too close. She seems like someone who's had more than enough of people getting close just to ignore her. You remember her story, the princess of Troy, cursed with prophecy, gifted by Apollo, who then condemned her to never be believed. She foresaw the fall of Troy, the betrayal of allies, the trap inside the wooden horse. She screamed, she warned. No one listened, and then captured, taken to Mycenae, killed beside the man she warned them all about. Historians still argue how much of her story is allegory, whether Cassandra represents suppressed voices or rejected truths, whether her madness was real or political invention. But Cassandra doesn't care about arguments anymore. She taps the pottery shard with one nail. They thought I was mad, she says. But madness is just knowing things too early. There's a lesser-known tradition, rarely cited, where Cassandra escapes her fate. She slips away during the chaos, disguises herself as a servant, and spends the rest of her days on an island no one charts, where she speaks only in riddles and never touches ink again. You wonder if this is that place. She flicks the shard away. It clinks into the grass like a useless coin. I stopped trying to warn people, she says. Started telling stories instead. She glances sideways at you. Easier to swallow a tale than a truth. You nod, because you know it's true. Sometimes fiction is a softer landing. She begins to hum low and tuneless, not a melody, just a vibration to keep the silence from closing in too tightly. People think being right is satisfying, she says, but it's not. It's exhausting. She picks up a new shard, draws a circle, then another, then crosses them out. Would you rather know the fire's coming? She asks. Or just dance until the smoke reaches your lungs? It's not a question that wants an answer. So you stay quiet. She doesn't mind. You sit there a long time listening to the rhythm of her breath, the scrape of pottery against stone, the distant echo of something falling far away. When you finally rise to leave, she doesn't stop you, just says, "Don't worry, I already knew you'd go, and it's not bitter, just inevitable, like the arc of a comet no one believes in. Your legs carry you farther than you expect, past the colonnade, past a grove of stunted olive trees, past a marble lion whose face has worn into a smooth blur. The path winds upward now, carved into the side of a hill, so slow in its incline, it feels like rising without effort. At the top, the land opens to a rocky plateau, and you find her sitting alone beneath the stars. Ariadne. She doesn't stand when she sees you, doesn't even blink. She's lying on her back, arms folded behind her head, eyes fixed skyward, like she's watching gods move through constellations. Maybe she is. You ease down beside her, careful not to break the silence. I liked you better as a thread, she says. You blink. Before they made you a crown, she continues. Before they named you after me. You remember now, the constellation, Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown, supposedly placed in the heavens by Dionysus after he rescued and married her. A consolation prize, a pretty myth. But she's not smiling. You know the other version, the one where she helps Theseus escape the labyrinth, gives him the thread, gives him her trust, and is left behind. On Naxos, alone. Historians still argue whether he abandoned her deliberately or by accident, whether Dionysus really appeared to take her hand, or whether that story was made up to hide the shame of abandonment. Ariadne doesn't seem to care which is true. I was a key, she says, not a person, a solution. She plucks a pebble from the ground and flicks it into the darkness. You give them a way out and they forget you were ever a door. There's a fringe theory among certain myth scholars that Ariadne was once a goddess in her own right, older than Dionysus, older even than Crete. A chthonic figure tied to cycles and spirals. They say the thread was never literal, but symbolic. That she didn't just help men escape, she helped them transform. But no one likes stories where the woman holds the power and keeps it. So she became a lover, then a bride, then a constellation. You ask her if the stars comfort her. She shrugs. They're quiet. That helps. You both lie back now, staring at the sky. It stretches so wide above you, it feels like it might fall, or you might. I loved him, you know, she says suddenly. You don't have to ask who. He needed me. Until he did not. Her voice is flat, not sad, not angry, just done. I could have built him a kingdom, she says. Instead, I built a story. Another silence. Then I keep hoping one day someone will write a version where I walk away first. You turn to her. Maybe I'll write it. She laughs, short, dry. You'll have to do better than thread metaphors. You smile anyway. Because even in her bitterness, there's brilliance. Even in her stillness, there's storm. Ariadne sits up now, brushing dust from her palms. You want advice? She asks. You nod. Never fall for someone who doesn't look back. She offers you her hand. You shake it. It's rougher than you expected. Warmer. Real. When she lets go, you feel something leave your fingers, an idea or an ending. You don't ask for it back. As you rise and begin your descent, you realize she's not waiting for rescue. She never was. She's rewriting the myth one star at a time. You descend slowly from the plateau, the night deepening like ink poured across the hills. The stars thicken above you, no longer dots, but streaks, as if someone has run a hand through the sky. There's no more wind now, only stillness, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a shawl. You've walked through myths tonight, not as a hero, not as a scholar, but as a witness, a quiet guest in the back rooms of stories that were never meant to be loud, stories told in the cracks, the pauses, the undoing. And now the path levels out. A clearing opens like a held breath. No torches, no temples, just a circle of stones, and at the center, one final woman. She is kneeling, head bowed, draped in black. You almost don't recognize her. But then she lifts her face, and there is no mistaking it. Demeter. Not the bountiful harvest goddess of mosaics, not the cornucopia holding wheat-crowned matron. This is the version after the fields have withered, after the sun has turned away, after the daughter has been taken. She rises slowly as you approach. Her voice is rough with dust and root. You're late, she says. You apologize. She nods, accepting it like the season accepts decay. They always come late, she says, after the ground's gone cold. You know the myth, how her daughter Persephone was taken to the underworld, how Demeter searched the earth torch in hand, how nothing grew until she returned, how winter was born from a mother's grief. But tonight, she's not grieving. She's waiting, not for a reunion, for rest. Historians still argue whether the Eleusinian mysteries were based on her, whether she was a metaphor for the agricultural cycle or something deeper, an echo of older, darker goddesses, of soil and sacrifice and silence. Demeter kneels again. I never wanted worship, she says, just for them to leave her alone. You ask if she's seen Persephone since. Her shoulders rise, fall. She comes and goes, she murmurs, but she never stays. There's a fringe belief long dismissed that Demeter and Hades made a pact, that it wasn't abduction but arrangement, that Persephone chose freedom from her mother, freedom from spring. Demeter doesn't confirm it. She just starts tracing a spiral in the dirt. Things grow, she says. Then they go. You sit beside her. The soil is cool beneath your fingers. The world remembers the bloom, she continues, but not the fallow. She looks at you. Promise me you'll remember the fallow. You nod. She offers you a seed. Plain, brown, hard. Don't plant it, she says. Just carry it. And you do. You place it in your pocket like a talisman. A small, stubborn piece of something that once waited for light. She closes her eyes again, not in pain, in peace. And you rise, the journey complete, though no one claps, no curtain falls. Only the wind picks up once more, brushing through the trees like a sigh from the earth itself. You step beyond the clearing, the stories following behind you like shadows gently fading. You're not a hero. You're not a god. You're just someone who listened. And that tonight was enough. Now, let everything soften. Your shoulders, your breath, your eyes. The stories are quiet. Now their voices fading into the still air. You've walked through myths and memories, through ruins and rooms where women once stood with fire in their hands and silence in their throats. You've sat beside grief that had teeth weighted in places where hope was a thread frayed thin by time and held the seed of something both old and waiting. You don't need to remember every name or every ending. That's not what matters. What matters is how still the air feels now, how gently the ground holds you, how the stars above, so distant and cold, suddenly feel like they're humming just for you. Take a deep breath and another. Let your mind drift now, not away from the stories, but deeper into them. Let them wrap around you like an old familiar blanket, not because they were happy, but because they were true in the quietest ways. And maybe, just maybe, one of them left a light on for you. Maybe one of them still lingers, not to be worshipped or retold, just to be remembered. Sleep well, traveler. You've earned your rest.